On August 15, 2025, President Donald Trump announced a sweeping set of tariffs from the White House Rose Garden. The world watched as he delivered his statement, the gravity of the moment clear in his tone and demeanor. These tariffs impacted nearly 70 nations, including long-standing allies in Europe and Asia. For many, it was an unprecedented move, targeting not just rivals but also partners who had stood by the United States for decades. It was a declaration of economic warfare, sending shockwaves through financial markets globally. Traders scrambled to respond, and uncertainty rippled across every major exchange. The president justified the move as a correction to unfair trade practices, aiming to reclaim American jobs. He argued that for too long, other nations had taken advantage of American openness, and it was time to restore balance. The tariffs, some as high as 60%, were designed to force nations to negotiate on Washington's terms. Ports and customs officials braced for immediate changes, as new rules took effect overnight. This was a seismic shift, treating allies like Germany and Japan with the same punitive logic as strategic competitors. The message was clear: no country would be exempt from America's new approach. The announcement blindsided many leaders, signaling a departure from decades of American foreign policy. Urgent meetings were called as governments scrambled to understand the implications. Global supply chains were thrown into chaos, with companies facing overnight cost surges. Factories paused production, and logistics managers raced to find solutions to mounting delays. Stock markets tumbled, and foreign governments expressed shock and dismay. The economic fallout was immediate, with investors fearing a prolonged period of instability. The August proclamation fundamentally altered international relations, forcing countries to reassess their alliances. Old certainties were suddenly in question, and new diplomatic strategies began to take shape. It was more than an economic policy. It was a moment that reshaped the global order. Trade routes shifted, and the balance of power began to tilt in unpredictable ways. The world was left questioning its place in this rapidly changing landscape. For ordinary people and business leaders alike, the future seemed more uncertain than ever before. The old rules no longer applied, and a new volatile reality emerged. As the dust settled, it was clear that the era of predictable global trade had come to an abrupt end. For 70 years, the global economic system operated on shared principles, with nations working together to build a framework that encouraged cooperation, stability, and mutual prosperity. This system was largely underwritten by American leadership, as the U.S. played a central role in shaping and maintaining the rules that governed international commerce. The Trump administration's new policy demolished this carefully constructed framework, replacing decades of multilateralism with a bold assertion of unilateral power and national interest. The America First doctrine views international trade as a zero-sum game, where every gain for another country is seen as a loss for the United States, with a sharp focus on reducing trade deficits. This marks a significant escalation from Trump's first term, as the administration now targets not just rivals, but also long-standing allies like France and South Korea, straining traditional partnerships. The policy transforms trade disputes into a blunt instrument of global coercion, using tariffs and threats as leverage to force concessions. It dismisses the rules-based order, bypassing institutions like the WTO that once served as neutral arbiters in trade disagreements. The U.S. now decides what is fair, dismantling global trading bodies' authority and setting its own terms for engagement. This forces nations to react to unpredictable decisions from the White House, creating uncertainty and tension in international relations. The goal is to secure the largest slice for the U.S., even if it means shrinking the overall pie for everyone else and undermining global economic growth. This approach overlooks global trade benefits like lower consumer prices, increased competition, and the spread of innovation that have historically lifted living standards worldwide. The 2025 tariffs make no distinction between allies and competitors, applying pressure indiscriminately and risking retaliation from all sides. The fundamental change is the rejection of the rules-based order itself, signaling a shift toward a world where power, not principle, determines outcomes. The new U.S. policy asserts economic might over established rules, challenging the very foundations of the post-war trading system. It creates a volatile global landscape, with nations scrambling to adapt to a future where cooperation is replaced by confrontation and uncertainty reigns. Europe reacted swiftly and decisively to the unfolding crisis, led by French President Emmanuel Macron, who condemned the U.S. tariffs as a blatant act of economic aggression, threatening the very fabric of transatlantic relations. Macron framed the moment as an existential challenge to European sovereignty, urging leaders to recognize the gravity of the situation and calling for unprecedented unity among member states. He declared that Europe must be an actor, not a spectator, in this rapidly changing world, emphasizing the need for bold action and collective resolve. Macron called for an emergency EU summit, rallying his counterparts to propose a new ambitious European industrial strategy that would secure the continent's future. Dubbed Strategic Autonomy 2.0, the plan aimed to reduce dependence on foreign supply chains, strengthen European industries, and foster innovation across sectors. Macron also championed retaliatory tariffs, targeting iconic American products, sending a clear message that Europe would not back down. His firm stance resonated across the continent, casting him as a staunch defender of European interests and inspiring public support in many countries. Macron argued passionately that Europe must become a true geopolitical power, capable of shaping its own destiny on the world stage. The American tariffs were a wake-up call, exposing Europe's vulnerabilities and highlighting the urgent need for greater self-reliance. Macron's call to arms was a plea for Europe to take responsibility for its destiny, to stand together in the face of external pressures. His leadership provided much-needed direction at a moment of profound uncertainty, offering hope and clarity to a continent in flux. Europe was urged to forge its own path forward in a competitive world, embracing unity, innovation, and resilience for the challenges ahead. Despite Macron's call for unity, the EU was divided in its response. The debate centered on whether to retaliate forcefully or pursue dialogue. France and Italy advocated for retaliation, seeing it as necessary to command respect. They viewed the crisis as an opportunity for strategic autonomy. Germany and other export-driven economies feared a trade war's escalation. They prioritized preserving trade flows over European pride. Smaller states and Eastern Europe were reluctant to alienate the US. They viewed the US as a security guarantor, complicating EU unity. The division exposed deep-seated differences in economic philosophy. The EU's diverse members struggled to forge a common policy. The crisis highlighted the difficulty of achieving unanimous consent. The division was not just economic, it was deeply geopolitical. Frustrated by EU divisions, Macron made a bold move, visiting Beijing. The visit signaled France's willingness to explore strategic options with China. Macron was greeted with state honors, showcasing Franco-Chinese cooperation. The visit included major economic and strategic agreements. Airbus secured a massive order, and French luxury goods gained market access. The nations announced joint initiatives on climate change and global health. Critics warned of dependence on China, citing its human rights record. Macron's move was pragmatic, seeking leverage and economic benefits. France aimed to position itself as a bridge between East and West. The pivot to China was a high-stakes gamble with significant risks. It could elevate France's stature or deepen EU divisions. The Parisian pivot was a defining moment in the new global landscape. Germany was hit hardest by the American tariffs, threatening its economic model. The automotive sector, a key industry, faced a nightmare scenario. German industry leaders urged the government to seek a negotiated settlement. They feared retaliatory tariffs would harm global supply chains. Germany prioritized trade flows over European pride, creating a rift with France. Scholz dispatched envoys to Washington for exemptions and compromises. The crisis highlighted tensions between France's ambitions and Germany's interests. Germany faced pressure to diversify markets and reduce reliance on the US. The tariff crisis exposed vulnerabilities in Germany's economic model. Germany grappled with standing in solidarity with Europe or pursuing national interests. The choice would have significant consequences for Germany and the EU. The crisis forced Germany into an uncomfortable position, balancing loyalty and dependence. The Trump tariffs forced global nations to reassess strategies. Brazil saw the US-EU conflict as an opportunity, negotiating new trade deals. It positioned itself as a key supplier to China and the EU. India adopted a cautious approach, focusing on bilateral negotiations. It aimed to secure exemptions and advance its economic goals. Switzerland, outside the EU, sought a special status amid the crisis. The tariff shockwave was a global realignment, not just a bilateral dispute. Countries found new leverage, and regional blocs gained importance. The unipolar moment was over, replaced by a fragmented, multipolar world. New corridors of trade and influence were being drawn in real time. Smaller nations faced challenges in a world dominated by economic giants. The global landscape became less stable and predictable. The 2025 trade war redrew the map of global alliances. The US-Europe partnership, based on shared values, was fractured. European nations viewed the US as an adversarial economic competitor. New coalitions formed, transcending traditional ideological divides. France's outreach to China exemplified issue-based partnerships. Alliances became transactional, making the global landscape less stable. International institutions like the WTO were rendered ineffective. The US bypassed them, eroding the rules-based system. Economic size and assertiveness mattered more than international law. Distinct economic blocs could emerge, reversing decades of integration. Europe sought to establish itself as an independent pole. The world moved toward a fractured landscape of competing spheres. Europe faced a critical crossroads defining its 21st century role. Macron championed unity and strategic autonomy, building a powerful Europe. This path required pooling sovereignty and investing in common policies. The alternative was fragmentation, prioritizing national interests over collective action. Germany sought special arrangements while Eastern Europe prioritized US security ties. A divided Europe remained vulnerable to great powers' whims. Unity offered the potential to become a stabilizing force globally. A unified Europe could champion a reformed, rules-based order. Fragmentation risked unraveling the European project and its achievements. The choice would impact Europe's future and the global balance of power. The world watched to see if Europe could rise to the challenge. The stakes were high with profound consequences for the continent.